The Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte are a Mohawk First Nation approximately 20 kilometers east of Belleville. They exercise their rights and responsibilities for the protection of and respect for their people and lands. In many First Nation communities, there are stories and experiences among Indigenous people of hate and racism. Regardless if it was subtle or blatant, the darkness that is ever present in the days of first contact between our ancestors and the settlers to even as recent as 2023 has remained as an obstacle.
My name is Travis Brandt, born and raised Tyinega Mohawk territory.
My name of my community is Tyinega Shannonville, and my name is Darcy.
My name is Nathan Holland. I live in Reed, which is not too far from Tyinega Mohawk territory. My family originally comes from Moosonee First Nation, which is just off of James Bay.
My name is Susan Barberstock. I'm the Director of Community Wellbeing here with Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. My background is social work and management, and I'm from here, Tyinega.
The name of my community is Tyinega Mohawk territory. My name's Leland Miracle, and I used to play hockey for the Napanee Stars.
Alexis, Tyinega. I like to do a lot of sports, and I've been living here since I was 4.
My name is Melanie Gray. I'm an Indigenous art therapist in Tyinega Mohawk territory. This is also my home community.
What comes to mind when you hear the words hate or racism?
Essentially just negativity, right? Like nothing good comes of either one, really.
I think a lot of anger, frustration maybe.
Makes me sad. It makes me sad that this day and age that we still have to deal with that.
Bullying, discriminating other people, not letting people join in activities, not respecting their rights as a person, as a human being.
Tell us about a time you've heard, seen, or experienced hate or racism.
I often see it in my job, right? I see all kinds of backgrounds, and people don't always know who we are or what we are. A lot of times people look at us and they treat us different than they would anybody else, right? I mean, even as a First Nations constable, you're treated different as a different member of a different service. So we deal with it a lot. But I don't know, there's just too many to really get into. Not only from just being in this job, but experiencing life all through high school. You know, you're segregated, you're looked at as different, you're viewed as the natives, so you're kind of an outsider right from the get-go.
I've been fairly lucky myself to not have anything too severe. I've never been beat up for my race or anything, but I think recently, just this past year at school, there's these couple guys, and they're just telling me to get over it or whatever, which is kind of messed up.
In hockey, in sports in general, just hearing the comments of the members or parents, and I don't think I've really heard anything just out and about, but it's been mainly in sports.
Actually, for since February of this year, I've been getting bullied and stuff on the bus because people know me from my past and that from previous schools, and they've been bullying me because of my past and that, even though they haven't known me since I was younger, and they've been just being a bully in that because they think it's cool when it's not.
Things that stand out in my memory around experiencing hate or racism myself was not looking Indigenous enough for certain people. So I'm a white passing Indigenous person, and if I remember, the feeling that I had was devastation, that I wasn't enough or that I was being judged by essentially the color of my skin, it not being what people perceive when they think of an Indigenous person, and in terms of like what media has told us an Indigenous person looks like. And so that's like very deeply rooted and very harmful. So that was a personal experience I've had. And then of course I have witnessed other friends, different ethnicities, backgrounds, go through things that I don't have that lived experience of, because I do have a privilege with the color of my skin as well.
I've had a lot of people like say, because I go to Hope, so they say like you don't belong here because you're white. And I know that my stepmom is Native, so she gets a lot of hate for being Native.
How does it make you feel when you see or hear about hate or racism?
Not good at all. I've got 2 young daughters, so it's scary to think that it's something that they could experience, something I've experienced. But you would think in the year 2023 that would come to an end, but unfortunately it's the world we live in, and it takes people to make that change. And as long as we do those things to make that change and that effort, then I think we can see a change for children coming up.
It kind of makes me upset knowing that like people are getting judged over all their skin colors and they should all be treated the same.
It makes me angry. It makes me angry, as I said, we're still dealing with it in this day and age, because it shouldn't be something that anybody has to deal with. And just to see how the younger generation has to deal with it, because they want to deal with it with acting out with that anger and lashing out, and that's not the way to deal with it. So
It makes me feel uncomfortable because of the history of my culture, and that because of how my culture got treated.
It makes me mad. It makes me want to kind of punch the person who's doing it.
What do I think causes hate and racism? I think that there's just like systemically it's allowed to happen. Like there's a lot of things that need to change in order to address this hate and racism that has been happening in on Turtle Island forever. Well, not forever. Let me take that back. When colonization happened, when people started enslaving others and treating others poorly based on where they were from, the color of their skin, whatever their idea was of, this I'm better than you. And that doesn't make sense, because as an Ungwehumwe person, we understand that we are all equal, that we are all on the same level, just like we are with everything else in creation. So it's just inherently does not make sense in my worldview and in our worldview pre-contact.
Well, multiple things, I think. One of the biggest ones would be it's a learned behavior. You see the videos and the photos of the children who are different backgrounds and playing with each other and calling them brothers and sisters. So they don't look at skin color or backgrounds at anything other than what it is, right? And then I think a lot of it is just learned behavior, stuff they hear, stuff they see. A lot of the old heads, it's kind of the mentality they have. And then obviously the stuff you see on the internet would definitely contribute to that. So I don't think that has helped our cause at all.
I know that like oftentimes they say like racism or hate comes from like your parents, right? It's like they tell you like, oh, we don't like these people or whatever, these people are bad, and that's what ends up like causing people to believe in those like sorts of things. But I don't know, I don't understand like how it gets to like that degree, right?
I think it's learned. It's learned sometimes through TV, but a lot of times it's learned in the home. It's what they're hearing from their parents, their grandparents, and they're just continuing on with what they're hearing and what they're learning.
What is a good way to cure hate or racism?
I remember a time back when I was in college, there was an Indigenous Studies class, and it was like there was a few of us there, and it was like we taught the class because nobody else knew about it, not even the professor who was teaching it. So I think is the more education that is done, the more that we can advance.
So I was taught by a teacher of mine that whenever we address like hate or racism, it always has to come from a place of love. It's like, they always say like, can't fight fire with fire, right?
Be kind to others, treat people how you want to be treated, do positive things even when you're in a bad mood. Be kind, because it's showing them that you're a bigger person than what they are, because you're doing positive things.
Sometimes people don't know. And it's just so ingrained in them that they don't realize what they're doing is so harmful. So like when we take the opportunity to have these conversations, to talk about it openly and honestly, that's when we can like start moving forward. And it takes time, but it's that active part of moving forward is just calling out that behavior of being like, hey, this is not okay. This is why it's not okay, without othering that person and being like, you're a bad person. You deserve to be punished because you feel this way. It's like, okay, well, like, let's actually have a conversation and try and like address it from that kind of perspective instead.
Creating relationships, giving people new knowledge of, how it affects people and how it's not right, because sometimes they have that misconceived notion of what a race is or how a race acts, or with Indigenous people, we're dealing with stereotypes. And a lot of systemic racism. It's not just that verbal that we're dealing with each other, but it's the system itself has some racism involved in it.
How can we move forward today for the sake of our future?
If you date back a couple of years when all the stuff came out about residential schools, a lot of the people did support Indigenous people during that time, and residential schools became a topic of conversation, and people weren't aware of that stuff that happened. I myself was already exposed to all that and knew all about it, so it was no surprise to me. But I think if people seen where we came from and seen who we are, I think that would be an important way to move forward.
Don't acknowledge the people that's being racist in that, because they're all negative people. The best example I can give is have positive people around you, because if you have negative people around you, it's just going to cause you to be negative and do the wrong things and stuff. But if you have positive people around you, then they're going to push you to do like the positive thing and stay positive and keep you out of trouble and stay a positive person.
A respectful conversation about how it affects you. That basic, when you say this, I feel this or I feel that. So having those conversations and making it personable rather than, you did this or you did that. It's just, this is how I feel when you said that. And sometimes they don't realize that it has that type of effect.
What is a way you can connect with someone to help them understand who and what your views are?
People have to want to, I'm not going to force somebody to have a conversation with me to let them know who we are, but if somebody's willing to learn, then absolutely, just conversation. And it is being introduced into the school systems a lot more outside of our community, so I think that's an important piece. But in saying that, I think that it needs to be done in a proper way. Like I said, when I came through college, the Indigenous Studies class was taught by a professor who didn't really understand. He looked to the Aboriginal students to basically teach the class, and then so I think it's a matter of having the right people in there to have the representation. Not to discredit this guy, but he didn't come from the background that he's trying to teach. So I think if you have experiences and stuff you can relate to, you're better able to provide that information rather than just read it from a textbook and give it that way. So I think that's another big piece as well.
I think having generalized conversations, I'll say beating around the bush in a sense of how you're coming to things instead of sometimes not just calling them out because they can get their back up or become offended that you're calling them out on things. But if you're having a respectful conversation about how it affects you, that basic, when you say this, I feel this or I feel that. So having those conversations and making it personable rather than, you did this or you did that. It's just, this is how I feel when you said that. And sometimes they don't realize that it has that type of effect.
By sitting down with them, having a civil conversation, explaining like, hey, this is how I do things, this is how I am as a human being. And if they don't like it, then they don't like it. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to keep on doing the same thing that you're doing as a human being. Just because other people don't like the way you are as a human being doesn't mean you have to change it, because that's the way they want to be. And you can't change it. You can only change yourself. And so, and if you're doing the right thing in that, stay positive and don't be negative. Don't let other people bring you down as a person, as a human being.
I had this happen to my friend. She was new in the school. No one liked her, so I went up to her and I was like talking to her, telling her like, don't listen to them. They're just doing this because you're new. You're joining eventually. Just like talk to them and be their friend, and like
I have had, because I've worked in schools with youth, because I used to be a youth worker and then I moved to adults, and but I also do contract work with some different high school students and classes, and I always have a kid who gets really like creeped out by my pelts I bring in. I'll bring in feathers, I'll bring in pelts, so that they have a chance to engage in those things that normally they wouldn't, right? Like these are not common. So I'm really open to conversation. That's how I try to be really approachable and open and kind when people do have questions, so that you're gonna get further with that kindness and that openness. I mean, there's times to put up firm boundaries, but there's also like when you have a chance and you have the space for it to engage in that conversation in a good way with that good mind, that got real, that good mind, good things can happen from that.
It is our hope that the stories and experiences shared here in this video can help bring understanding, awareness, and education to those who do not realize the kind of hate and racism that Indigenous people have gone through. In order to move forward and forge a new relationship between nations, we must let go of these negative views and work together.